The terminal at Gate C9 was busy the way most airports are on a Thursday morning. People were moving fast, dragging rolling bags, staring at their phones, rushing to find their gates. The departure board above the seats showed one word next to Flight 1174. On time. Nobody looked at the woman sitting alone by the far window. She looked to be around 60 years old, maybe a little older. Her hair was silver and cut short, neat but not styled. She wore a simple navy blue jacket, dark pants, and flat shoes that looked comfortable rather than fashionable. There was nothing about her that asked for attention. Nothing about her that said she was different from anyone else waiting for a morning flight. She sat with her hands resting in her lap. No phone in her hand. No book open. No laptop on the seat next to her. She was simply sitting and watching the planes move on the tarmac outside the big glass window. She watched them with calm, steady eyes, the kind of eyes that had watched many things in many places for a very long time. Her bag was on the floor between her feet. It was old brown leather, the kind that had been used so much it had turned nearly black. It had no stickers on it, no decorations, no name tag except the plain airline label attached that morning. The bag had traveled far. That much was clear just by looking at it. But it said nothing about where it had been. The gate agent called boarding groups one by one. The usual crowd of travelers stood too early, pressed into the narrow lane, lifted bags into the air. She waited. She waited until the very last group was called. Then she stood slowly, picked up her leather bag, and walked to the gate without hurrying. Her boarding pass said seat 22B. Middle seat. The kind of seat that experienced travelers always tried to avoid. She sat down without complaint, placed her bag under the seat in front of her, and reached for the safety card in the seat pocket. She actually read it. Not the way most people pretend to read it while waiting for the safety demonstration to finish. She read every word, studied every diagram, with the careful attention of someone who understood that even routine things deserve to be taken seriously. The man in the window seat was a businessman, maybe 45 years old, already deep in his laptop. He gave her a quick polite nod when she sat down and then looked back at his screen. The young woman in the aisle seat had earbuds in and her eyes closed before the plane even finished boarding. Nobody on the plane gave her a second look. She was just a passenger. Flight 1174 pushed back from the gate at 8:14 in the morning, exactly on time. The plane taxied slowly, joined the line of aircraft waiting for the runway, and then lifted off into a pale blue sky. She turned to look out the window past the businessman beside her. Below, the city shrank quickly, the streets and buildings becoming a map, then a pattern, then just colors. The coastline appeared, a long dark edge where the land ended and the ocean began. She had seen this coastline many times before, from many different aircraft, on many different mornings. But those mornings were behind her now. Today was different from all those other flights. Those other flights had taken her towards something, a mission, an assignment, a posting in a country whose name could not be mentioned in public. Today's flight was taking her away from all of that. Today, for the first time in 38 years, she was not flying toward a mission. She was flying home. The leather bag under the seat in front of her held more than clothes and travel items. Wrapped carefully inside soft cloth was a small collection of medals and service awards, the physical proof of 38 years spent doing work that almost no one knew about. She had not packed them to show anyone. She had packed them because they belonged at home, in the house where she had grown up, and she was finally going back to that house. 38 years. Most people on the plane could not have imagined what that number represented. It was not 38 years of ordinary work. It was 38 years of living in places that did not appear on tourist maps, making decisions in situations that were never described in any newspaper, doing things that were done precisely because they were invisible. The people she had protected during those years did not know her face. They did not know her name. They never would. She had made peace with that a long time ago. She closed her eyes and let the hum of the engines fill the quiet around her. 40 minutes into the flight, the captain was going through routine communications with air traffic control when a second message came through. It was not a routine message. It identified the flight by number. It identified a passenger by seat number, 22B. And it said that 2 military aircraft were being diverted from a training exercise approximately 90 miles to the north. They were changing course. They were coming to this flight. The captain read the message twice. Then he read it a third time. He had spent 9 years in the Air Force before moving into commercial aviation. He had flown in conditions that most people would never experience and seen things from a cockpit that could not be easily described. He thought he had seen most of what aviation had to offer. He had never seen a message like this one. He turned to his first officer and handed her the printed message without a word. She read it. Then she looked up at him. "They changed course for a passenger on our flight," she said. "That is what it says," the captain replied. She read it again. Then she handed it back and looked out at the open sky ahead of them. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "She must have done something extraordinary," the first officer said finally. "I think that is exactly right," the captain said. He picked up the intercom handset and thought for a moment about what he was going to say. He wanted to get the words right. This was not the kind of moment that deserved careless words. The passengers on the left side of the aircraft saw them first. They came from the northwest, far below the flight's altitude at first, 2 dark shapes rising steadily against the blue sky. They moved with the kind of precise, deliberate speed that is different from the movement of commercial aircraft, faster, more direct, purposeful in a way that is immediately recognizable even to people who know nothing about military aviation. As they climbed and drew closer, their shapes became clear. 2 fighter jets. Moving directly toward Flight 1174. A woman in row 14 pressed her face to the window and said, quietly but loud enough for the row around her to hear, "Oh my goodness." The man beside her looked up from his book. A teenage boy 3 rows back had already seen them and was pulling at his father's sleeve. "Dad! Dad, look! Look at those planes!" His father looked. He sat forward in his seat. Then the captain's voice came through the speakers, calm and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. For those of you looking out the left side of the aircraft, you can see 2 military jets approaching our position. I want to assure you that there is nothing to worry about. This is intentional. Please keep your seatbelts fastened. I will have more information for you in just a moment." The effect of that announcement moved through the cabin like a slow wave. The people who had been asleep opened their eyes. The people absorbed in their phones and laptops looked up. Earbuds came out. The low ambient noise of a cruising aircraft, the conversations, the music, the tapping of keyboards, faded away until the only sound was the engine noise and the quiet of 200 people paying attention. The jets reached the altitude of the commercial airliner and leveled off perfectly, 1 on each side, matching the speed of the larger plane with effortless precision. Their wings did not waver. Their formation was exact. They settled into position as though they had always been there, as though Flight 1174 had always had this escort and the passengers had simply not noticed. Phones came out all over the cabin. People held them to the windows, recording. Others simply pressed their faces to the glass and watched with wide eyes. In seat 22B, she did not move. She sat with her hands in her lap, her eyes looking forward, her expression still and composed. If she had heard the announcement, she gave no outward sign. If she knew what was coming toward the plane from 90 miles to the north, she did not show it. The senior flight attendant made her way carefully down the aisle. She had worked commercial aviation for 14 years. She had managed medical situations, severe turbulence, and once a passenger who had decided mid-flight that he simply could not continue sitting down. She had never been asked to carry a message like the one the captain had just given her. She reached row 22 and crouched beside the middle seat so that she could speak without the whole row hearing. "Ma'am," she said quietly. The captain asked me to deliver a message to you personally. She looked up from the small notepad in her hand where she had written the words exactly as the captain had given them to her. She did not want to get a single word wrong. The captain wants you to know that the 2 aircraft you can see outside were on a scheduled training exercise 90 miles north of here this morning. When word reached the base that you were on this flight, the exercise was stopped. Both pilots changed course. They are here specifically for you. The base asked for this escort. The people you served with wanted to make sure that you did not land today without knowing that they know who is on this plane, and that they remember what you gave. She stopped reading and looked at the woman in seat 22B. There was a long silence. Outside the left window, the fighter jet held its perfect position, its wings steady in the blue air. They changed course, the woman said. Her voice was very quiet. They actually stopped a training exercise and changed course. Yes, ma'am, the flight attendant said. Another silence. Please tell the captain thank you, she said finally. And please tell him I am grateful they came to the plane instead of waiting at the airport. I never liked ceremonies. She paused. This is better. This is much better. The flight attendant nodded and returned to the front of the cabin. The whispers started in the rows closest to row 22 and spread forward and back through the aircraft the way a wave moves outward from a stone dropped in still water. Do you know who she is? Which passenger? The woman in the middle seat, near the wing. What did she do? Nobody knows exactly. Military, they say. A long time. The teenage boy who had first spotted the jets from his window seat turned to his father with the direct, urgent questions that only children ask without hesitation. Why are those planes here, Dad? Who are they for? His father looked at the jets outside and then down the aisle toward the rows he couldn't see from his seat, and then back at his son. Someone on this plane, he said. Someone who did something important for a very long time, and the military is honoring them. The boy thought about this. He looked at the jet outside the window, close enough that he could see the markings on the fuselage, the angle of the tail, the dark shape of the cockpit where a pilot sat. But why here, he asked. Why on the plane? His father did not answer right away. He sat quietly for a moment. Because she's going home, he said. And they wanted her to know they know. The captain's voice returned to the speakers, and the entire cabin went immediately silent. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to share a little more with you about what you are seeing. The 2 aircraft flying alongside us are military jets. They were diverted from a training exercise 90 miles to the north of our current position when personnel at the base learned that one of our passengers was on this flight. The diversion was not an order from anyone in a chain of command. The pilots changed course because they chose to. This escort is voluntary. He paused. The passenger in seat 22B served for 38 years in roles that I am not able to describe to you, because most of what she did was and remains classified. What I can tell you is that the people who know what she did considered it important enough to stop a training exercise and fly 90 miles to be alongside her on her way home. I thought you deserved to understand what you are looking at. He paused one more time. Welcome home, ma'am. It is an honor to have you on this aircraft. For 3 seconds after the intercom clicked off, the cabin was absolutely still. Then someone in the back of the plane began to clap. Slowly at first, the way a person claps when they are not sure if others will join, but certain that the moment requires something. Others joined. Then more. Then the sound built from the back of the plane forward, moving through the rows until every person in the cabin who had 2 hands was using them, the applause filling the pressurized air of the aircraft and reflecting off the low curved ceiling and becoming something warm and full and genuine. She did not stand. She did not turn around. She did not raise a hand or acknowledge what was happening behind her in any visible way. She sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes forward, exactly as she had been sitting for the last hour. Except that anyone watching very closely would have seen, at the corner of her left eye, the faint beginning of something she controlled immediately and completely. The pilot in the left jet had been flying military aircraft for 17 years. He had escorted foreign dignitaries. He had flown in exercises across 3 continents. He had been part of formations over stadiums and memorials and state funerals. He had never escorted a commercial flight before. When the message had come through to the base that morning, a quiet message, passed through informal channels rather than official orders, the kind of message that travels through a military community when something important needs to be recognized without paperwork, he had read it once and told his flight partner without hesitation. "We're going," he had said. His partner had read the message. "We're going," she agreed. They had changed course 90 miles from where they were supposed to be, climbing and adjusting until they found Flight 1174 against the blue sky and moved into formation alongside it. Now, holding position off the left wing of the commercial airliner at 34,000 feet, he could see the small oval windows of the passenger cabin. He could not see the people inside. But he knew she was there. He thought about 38 years. He thought about what 38 years of that kind of service actually meant, the decisions made in difficult places, the years spent away from everything familiar, the work done without any expectation that anyone would ever know about it. He thought about all of that, and then he did the only thing available to him at that altitude, moving at that speed, separated from her by the thickness of an aircraft fuselage. He rocked his wings. It was a slow, deliberate movement, left wing down, then right wing down, then level again. In aviation it is one of the oldest gestures of acknowledgement between pilots. It means, "I see you." It means, "I know you are there." It means, in this case, "We know what you gave, and we have not forgotten." In seat 22B, she turned her head and looked out the left window for the first time since the jets had arrived. She looked at the fighter jet flying alongside, close enough to see clearly, steady as a rock despite the distance and the speed, its pilot visible as a dark shape in the cockpit. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she raised her right hand from her lap and held it up flat beside the window, palm forward, fingers together, in the precise position of a military salute. She held it for a full 4 seconds. Then she lowered her hand and looked forward again. The businessman in the window seat had been watching. He said nothing. He closed his laptop slowly and looked out the window at the jet, and he did not open his laptop again for the rest of the flight. The descent began 40 minutes later. The engines changed pitch as the pilot reduced power. The nose tilted forward slightly. The coastline appeared below, and beyond it the first signs of the city, the roads, the clusters of buildings, the rivers cutting through flat land toward the sea. At 12,000 feet, the captain's voice came one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach. I want to let you know that our escort will remain with us until we reach the outer marker of the approach, approximately 8,000 feet. After that, they will return to base." At exactly 8,000 feet, both jets moved at the same moment. The left jet banked slowly to the south, its wing tilting as it turned away from the commercial airliner, climbing slightly as it went. The right jet banked north, turning in the opposite direction with the same smooth deliberate precision. They peeled away from Flight 1174 like two hands opening, symmetrical and clean, two aircraft that had come 90 miles out of their way returning now to where they were supposed to be. As they turned, the sun caught the left jet for one moment, a single bright flash of light off the fuselage, and then they were both moving away, growing smaller, becoming shapes and then outlines and then nothing. But they left something behind. The contrails from both jets crossed each other in the air above and behind the commercial aircraft, two white lines drawn against the blue sky, forming a brief perfect X before the wind began to take them apart. For 2 minutes those lines were visible from the aircraft windows, dissolving slowly at the edges, thinning, fading. The boy in the row ahead watched them until they were completely gone. Then he pressed his hand flat against the cold glass of the window, palm open, as though he could hold the moment a little longer before it disappeared entirely. The wheels touched the runway with the familiar thump and screech of a commercial landing, the thrust reversers engaging, the aircraft slowing through its landing roll. Outside the windows, the airport infrastructure appeared, terminal buildings, taxiways, ground vehicles moving with the ordinary efficiency of a working airport. Nobody stood up. The seatbelt sign turned off with its usual ding, and normally that sound produced an immediate rustling of movement, the unclicking of belts, the reaching into overhead bins, the shifting and pressing toward the aisle that happened on every flight the moment it was permitted. None of that happened. Every person in the cabin sat in their seat as the aircraft taxied toward the gate, still and quiet, without anyone having discussed it or organized it or suggested it. The understanding had simply settled over the cabin like something natural: she should go first. That was the right thing. Everyone knew it. She gathered her leather bag from under the seat in front of her. She checked the clasp once. She stood. She was the only person standing on the entire aircraft. For a moment she stood at her row and looked down the aisle toward the front of the plane. Then she began to walk forward, and as she passed each row the passengers in those seats watched her with a quality of attention that was not curiosity. It was something else. Something quieter and more serious than curiosity. A woman in a business suit sat with her hands folded and watched her pass. A young couple traveling together sat side by side in silence. An older man with a military posture of his own watched her come level with his row and gave a single nod, slow and deep, the kind of nod that carries real weight. The teenage boy who had watched the jets from the window was sitting on his knees in his seat to see over the rows ahead of him. When she reached his row he stared at her with wide open eyes, not rude staring, not the staring of someone gawking at a stranger, but the staring of someone trying to memorize something important before it disappeared. She walked past him. He would think about this flight for the rest of his life. He could not have explained why he knew that, sitting in his seat at 11 years old, but he knew it the way children sometimes know things without being able to say where the knowledge comes from. At the front of the aircraft, the captain had come out of the cockpit. He stood in the forward galley in his uniform, hands at his sides, posture straight. She stopped in front of him. "Thank you for the announcement," she said. "You chose your words carefully. I noticed that." "Thank you for your service, ma'am," he said. 38 years is not a small thing. He extended his hand. She shook it. The handshake lasted a moment longer than a usual handshake, the grip firm on both sides, the kind that passes between people who understand without words what the other has done. She walked down the jet bridge alone, her leather bag on her shoulder, her footsteps quiet on the carpeted floor. The terminal was moving with its usual morning life when she came through the gate door. Announcements were being made at adjacent gates. A family was trying to keep 3 small children moving in the same direction. 2 men were arguing over whether they had time for coffee. She walked through all of it without hurrying. But word had already moved through the airport's informal network, the same way news always moves through places where people work closely together and communicate constantly. The crew coordinator had told the gate agents. The gate agents had told the ground crew. The message had moved through radio channels and break room conversations and the easy shorthand of people who spent their working lives in the same building. A ground crew supervisor near the terminal windows had been watching the aircraft come in. He had seen the jets break away at 8,000 feet. He had watched their contrails cross and fade. He stood a little straighter when she came through the door. A gate agent at the adjacent gate looked up from her monitor and followed her with her eyes as she passed, saying nothing. Near the baggage claim, a retired officer was waiting for his own luggage. He had served 22 years and had been out for 6, and he had learned in those 6 years that there are ways of recognizing people who carry a certain kind of history, even when they are in civilian clothes, even when they are carrying an old leather bag and wearing a plain navy jacket. He crossed the floor toward her. "Excuse me," he said. "Were you on flight 1174? She looked at him. "Yes. I saw the jets break off on approach," he said. "I was watching from the window upstairs." She nodded. 38 years, he said. It was not a question. 38 years, she confirmed. He studied her face for a moment, the quiet steadiness of it, the particular kind of calm that comes from decades of operating in situations where composure was not optional. "I won't ask what you did," he said. "I appreciate that," she said. "Welcome home," he said. He extended his hand. She shook it. "You as well," she said, and walked on toward the exit. Outside the terminal, a small white car was parked at the curb. A woman was leaning against the passenger door, younger, perhaps 32, with the beginning of the same silver that appeared in her mother's hair. She was holding 2 cups of coffee and watching the terminal doors with the focused attention of someone who had been waiting for this particular door to open for a very long time. When she saw her mother come through the glass doors, she pushed off the car and stepped forward quickly and then stopped, the coffee cup still held out to her sides, her face doing something complicated and then something simple. They met on the pavement between the terminal doors and the car. The coffee cups were held away to the side and they held each other with the rest of it, a long, full embrace, the kind that does not need to be explained or described, the kind that speaks for itself about distance and time and waiting and the particular relief of someone finally returned. They stood there while the airport morning moved around them. Eventually her daughter pulled back and handed her one of the coffees. They looked at each other for a moment. "The jets," her daughter said. "I heard about the jets. Someone posted a video from the plane." "Already?" she said. "It has a lot of views," her daughter said. She said nothing to that. She looked at the coffee cup in her hands. "They changed course," she said. 90 miles. They stopped a training exercise and changed course." Her daughter watched her. "I did not expect that," she said. "I did not expect anyone to do that." They got in the car and drove through the city toward the house where she had grown up, the house her daughter had maintained through all the years of her mother's absence, keeping the gutters clear and the paint fresh and the lights on, doing the slow patient work of keeping a home ready for someone who was always coming back even when there was no date to mark on a calendar. She watched the city through the passenger window. She recognized things, a church, a park, the curve of a particular road she had ridden her bicycle on at 12 years old. Other things had changed. A diner she remembered was now a pharmacy. A lot that had been empty for decades had become a small apartment building. The city had continued, as cities do, without her. Her daughter talked about the neighborhood, about the neighbors, about what had changed and what had stayed the same, filling in the years with the quiet detail of someone who had been the keeper of all the ordinary information that accumulates in a place when the person who belongs there is somewhere else. She listened. The house looked right. That was the only word for it, right. The proportions of it against the sky, the shape of the windows, the oak tree in the front yard that was much larger than it had been, the porch with its 2 wooden chairs. It looked exactly the way a place looks when it has been waiting for you and you have finally arrived. The front door was dark green, the same color it had always been, the same color it had been when she left 38 years ago. She stood on the front path and looked at it. Something happened in her chest that she did not try to name. Inside, on the small table in the front hallway, her daughter had placed a single framed photograph. It was a photo of her from perhaps 20 years ago, somewhere she recognized by the landscape behind her as a place in a country she could not name aloud. She was younger in the photograph, and serious, and she was looking at something outside the frame with an expression the camera had accidentally made look like courage. She stood and looked at the photograph for a long time. That evening she sat on the back porch as the light left the sky. Her daughter had made dinner, a simple meal, nothing elaborate, the kind of food that tastes better than restaurant food because of where it is eaten and who made it. They had sat at the kitchen table and talked about small things. The neighbor's dog. A book her daughter was reading. Whether the oak tree in the front yard needed a trim. Small things. Ordinary things. The best kind of things. Now the porch was quiet. The neighborhood made its evening sounds, a lawn mower in the distance, children's voices from a few streets over, a dog barking twice and then stopping, the last birds of the day. She held her coffee and thought about the 2 pilots who were somewhere at their base tonight. They were probably eating dinner in the mess hall, filling out whatever paperwork was required for a diverted escort mission, talking to their colleagues about the day. They had changed course 90 miles for a woman they had never met, whose name they had probably been given only that morning, whose work they knew almost nothing about except that someone had said it mattered. Someone had said she deserved this, and they had said yes without hesitation. That was a very old way to honor a person. Not a ceremony. Not a medal. Not a speech. Just two pilots changing course on a clear Thursday morning because someone they respected had said the right thing to do was to go. She thought about the captain, who had come out of the cockpit to stand in the galley and shake her hand. About the flight attendant who had written the captain's message on a notepad to make sure she got every word right. About the businessman who had closed his laptop and not opened it again. About the boy pressing his hand flat against the cold window glass long after the jets were gone. She reached into the outer pocket of her leather bag and took out a piece of paper, a page torn from an in-flight magazine, folded in half. She had noticed the young man in the aisle seat hold it out to her as she was leaving, and she had taken it and placed it in her bag without reading it. She unfolded it now. On the back of an advertisement, written in ordinary ballpoint pen, were the words, "I don't know what you did. I don't know who you are. But those jets came 90 miles for you, and I think that means you gave something most of us can't imagine. Thank you. Safe travels home." She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and held it in both hands. 38 years of work that could not be discussed. 38 years of decisions made in difficult places for people who would never know her name. 38 years of choosing, every time, to do the work that needed to be done without asking whether anyone would ever know about it. She had made that choice clearly and completely and she had never regretted it. But she had not expected the jets to change course. She had not expected the captain's voice over the intercom, choosing his words carefully. She had not expected a stranger on a commercial flight to tear a page from a magazine and write something honest on the back of it and hold it out to her in the aisle. She had not known, until today, how much it would mean to be seen. The stars were coming out now, one by one, appearing in the darkening sky above the porch, above the neighborhood, above the city that had continued without her and was now, in its ordinary way, receiving her back. She sat with the folded note in her hands and the coffee cooling beside her and the sounds of the evening around her. She was home. Really home. The green door was behind her. The photograph was on the table in the hallway. The medals were in the leather bag, wrapped in soft cloth, waiting to find their place on a shelf somewhere in the house where they belonged. Two pilots had changed course 90 miles because someone had said she was worth it. A boy had pressed his hand to a window because something true had been visible for a few minutes at 34,000 feet. A stranger had written 6 sentences on the back of a magazine advertisement and held them out to her in an aisle. She had given 38 years without asking to be seen. Today she had been seen. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was exactly enough. If this story moved you, share it with someone who serves without asking to be noticed. Subscribe for more stories about the quiet lives that hold the world together.